All right, we're going to talk about equity financings today in a very basic way. This is going to be an overview of the concept of equity financing. Now, I'm using the word equity financing specifically because there are lots of different kinds of ways to finance your company. You could borrow money from a bank, you could issue bonds to raise money, but the point here is that your company wants to raise money for anything, for operations, whatever they intend to use the money for. In this case, you are selling equity to do that. That's why they call it an equity financing. You're essentially selling stock in exchange for cash. So you're selling a piece of ownership in your company in exchange for money. That stock cash exchange is what characterizes as an equity financing. So these are some of the terms that you'll hear a lot around the subject of equity financing, and they're terms that you should understand. The first, you'll hear people say, we're going to do a round of financing. That simply means they're going to go through the process of selling some stock in exchange for money to investors. You might also call it a funding event. It's referred to as a funding event, meaning there's an event that happens to the company where they raise some money. Often they're referring to equity financing when they say funding event. Additionally, they'll use the word raise. We're going to go do a raise. And these kind of are used interchangeably, but raise is another way to talk about equity financing. And then also the concepts of shares outstanding and dilution become important, because shares outstanding, of course, means how many shares are there in existence for the corporation. And that's important because it has to do with what percentage of the company you own and how many shares you own and how many shares you are going to grant to the investor or issue to the investor. And that has to do with dilution, the concept of dilution. A quick reminder, dilution is when you raise money that you own less of the company, and we'll kind of explain that when we go into our example here. But equity financing generally, the point of it is that your company needs money to finance operations, to grow more quickly, to buy a company. There are a bunch of reasons why you might need that money, but you're willing to sell part of your company in exchange for that money. You feel like there's going to be value delivered by raising additional money. So let's talk about an example of equity financing. What happens when you go through this process? Essentially, you're going to go find an investor who's interested in your company, go through the pitch process. You'll create an argument as to why the investor should invest in your company and at what price. In order to do that, you have to establish what's called a pre-money valuation. Pre-money, of course, a reminder, means that it's how much your company is worth before you raise any money, in this case in an equity financing. So pre-money valuation, there are a bunch of theories about how you do valuation, but pre-money valuation, for simplicity for this example, we'll say that our company is worth $10 million pre-money. Okay? And our investor agrees that the company is worth $10 million, and the investor agrees to put $5 million into the company as an investment. The reason these two numbers are important is because it has to do with how many shares you're going to have to issue to the new investor, and therefore how much dilution you experience as an owner or as a shareholder. So again, very simple example, a $10 million pre-money valuation, and I raise $5 million, it's a fairly simple math equation. You just add your pre-money valuation, my company today is worth $10 million, plus I just raised $5 million in cash, and now it's in my bank account. Now my company's worth $15 million. So that is the post-money valuation. So pre-money, before the raise, how much did I raise? 5. So it's the same company, and then I raised a bunch of cash. Now I have cash in the bank. So now I'm worth $15 million post-money. These are important terms. Why? Because let's say you were a 50% owner of this $10 million company, and there are two 50% owners, right? And each owner, this is entrepreneur number 1 and entrepreneur number 2, each owner owns 50% of the company, okay? Now, after you've raised $5 million and the company's worth $15 million, you would have to issue, let's say that there are 1,000 shares outstanding, okay? And each person owns 500 of those shares. Now you're going to have to issue another 500 shares because this is worth $15 million. You can see the math here. There's 1,000 shares, and each share If it's $10 million, I can't do that math. But if there's 1,000 shares, each of these folks owns 500 shares. And in this case, we're going to have to issue another 500 shares here for the new investor. So we're going to have 1,500 shares total at the end of the equity financing. And in that case, with 1,500 shares, your individual version of ownership, which was 500 shares, becomes 33% of the new entity. Okay? So you went from 50% to 33% ownership. That's dilution. What you experienced was dilution. But that's okay. You're doing an equity financing. You're raising money for your company. And now your company has cash to operate. So it's not always a bad thing that you own less of the company. The new investor now owns 33%. And your co-founder here owns 33% as well. So basically that's the concept behind equity financing, is that you are selling stock for cash, and there's a simple math equation that happens here, and that tells you how many new shares you need to issue, and therefore what percentage of the company is owned by the new investor.